I'm Fry. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's a great pleasure to be here. Always wonderful to share knowledge and support great new interesting projects like yours.
Thanks. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your background? When did you start playing euphonium, and how did you grow to become the prolific artist that you are?
Well, so that's a funny question because last night I played a concert and my high school band director actually came and attended. He's not heard
That's
me play in
awesome.
years. Yeah, it was great, and it was a total surprise. And I dedicated one of my solos to him, and we got a picture afterwards and stuff.
Aw.
Anyway, it was a really neat thing. But where that ties into my history is that I actually started on trumpet in fifth grade, and then my band director tricked me into playing the baritone horn for one concert, he said. And I'm just letting you know, it's been like a 34-year concert and stuff like that. Um, but
Yeah, I had a bit of a similar path. I wanted to play tuba like nothing else, and my band director told me like, well, Andrew, like euphonium seems a really good fit for you right now. Maybe next year. I'm still waiting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think it was a great thing because in trumpet land, I was, all, doubling parts, didn't have a lot of independence. When I got to play baritone or euphonium, then I had my own part. I felt really proud that I was my section.
Yeah.
And I thought that there was maybe a little bit more to do. Later, when I got into college, I went to the University of Georgia, studied with David Randolph there. And that's where I really got a huge amount of motivation about a solo career. Lots of people told me, oh, euphonium players, you have to do a military band or you don't really make it. You need to learn trombone. And I told the trombone teacher, who was a bit of a scoundrel, I was like, I'm not learning trombone. I'll learn tuba because I like the tuba guy.
Yeah.
And just got the practice bug. I learned about becoming a better player and had organized practice. So I felt like I got better every day. Started doing lots of competitions that were not just for euphonium or brass, but all instrumentalist. And that's sort of where I started promoting the euphonium. The brass junkies give me a hard time because one of the things in my biography is I say
Yeah,
I'm
the
an
ambassador of
ambassador
euphonium.
of euphonium. I'm not the only ambassador of euphonium. I have pushed a number of new unique opportunities.
That's awesome.
Um, and then doing lots of those competitions taught me a lot about that we don't just need to think about our playing like a euphonium player or tuba player, but we need to think about how string players and pianists and
Yes.
woodwinds perceive our instrument. And I feel like that served me well in the realm outside of tuba euphonium land. And then went to England, studied with Stephen Mead at the Royal Northern College of Music for a
Heck yeah.
master's and a professional performance diploma. Brass band scene was majorly intense, nothing like the wind band scene in the United States at that point in time.
Mhm.
And learned so much from Stephen, and also did some secondary study with James Gourlay and Robert
Nice.
Childs. And yeah, the brass band scene was it was amazing, great contacts. And then started doing a solo career with 60, 70 engagements and ramped up to
Whoa.
almost like 100 engagements for about my first 5, 6 years after grad school.
Heck yeah.
Uh, yeah, so it's been really exciting. I think like over 150 commissions or arrangements made for me.
That's
Publishing
awesome.
company, euphonium.com, retail website, great place to buy euphonium music and tuba
Yeah,
music.
I've been buying my euphonium music on euphonium.com since like 2014. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, this I don't remember if I told you this at the Mortec. We met in like 2013
Hmm.
at the oh shoot, in India at the I'm forgetting the name of it. The Music for All Festival
Yeah, yeah.
at Bands of
Music for All
America.
concert band. Yeah. That's a
Yeah, and
great thing.
that's where I learned about euphonium.com, and I was like, wow, there are all these arrangements I can just get. Sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole euphonium.com started, I think, in like 2004,
Mhm.
and a little bit before that. And I used to get emails from people asking, where can I buy Philip Sparks Pantomime? Where can I get the Ito Fantasy Variations? Where can I buy the Cosma?
Yeah.
And I used to send them to the different publishers in Japan and Europe. But then I had the idea, I was like, why don't I just sort of
Yeah,
sell
you're
some of
leaving
this?
so much money on the table.
Well,
Well,
sheet
and
music
also,
business,
yeah, and
yeah,
providing the service too.
yeah, yeah. It's more about the service. Sheet music
Yeah,
for reselling music is not the most profitable business.
sure.
but I will say this much: I don't get as many emails about where you can buy stuff anymore. And we use a lot of the proceeds to fund new commissions and scholarships and stuff like that. So anyway,
Yeah. Well, because
it's
this is a good
something that's just
opportunity.
grown.
So this is probably a good opportunity to talk about the 20th anniversary of the IET Festival, which
Oh yeah,
is obviously probably that's part of euphonium.com. I mean, you get the flyers for it every year.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
It's
proceeds from the business fund scholarships to the institute too?
Yeah, so we do a
That's
lot of
awesome.
different things. So like the sheet music sales, they're all like their own separate companies, like within
Mhm.
that, but they're sort of they all support each other. I
Yeah.
mean, sheet music selling sheet music is not my primary income source.
Hmm.
But we sponsor lots of gift certificates, both through the store and scholarships for the IET festival, like at regional ITA events and
Nice.
other things, and through the Earl Lauder fellowships. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that filter into each other. And like you said, this is our 20th anniversary that started in 2004.
That's
And
awesome.
it's super exciting. I got a little flyer here if people want to see just a little quick screenshot of who the artists are. Chris Buckley, who was attended the first event.
Whoa.
Um, Dave Childs, who's been with us for I think about 14 or 15 years. Brian Bowman, who's been
Heck
here
yeah.
since I think year 3.
Nice.
Clayton Maddox, Chris Schmidt, Tom Lukowitz, Gail Robertson, who was one of the original first year teachers, Glenn
That's
Van Loy,
awesome.
Warren Deck, Helen Tyler's going to come give a presentation on brass bands.
Heck yeah.
Kimiko Yamada from Japan and also lives in Alabama. Oysten Bodsvik, of course, this guy in the white jacket. Mauro Martins, who's going to be
Yeah.
making his first appearance, and then Chris Olka, who's been a longtime friend and been on staff with us for maybe like 5 years.
That's awesome.
So that plus a lot of other special commissions. We're going to have an alumni event the last 2 days. So if you happen to attend either as a faculty or a participant over the past 19 years, we're going to do a big bang up event on Friday night with a big food fest on the quad at Emory.
That's
And
awesome.
then have the big group join on the last 2 pieces of the gala concert. So I'm hoping we're going to have about 120 to 150 participants for the week. And then I'm hoping to get somewhere between 30 and 50 alumni. And my naive optimism says maybe the big group will be like 175 to 200 for the end.
Be awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty awesome. And if you
That's sweet.
need info, it's at ietfestival.com. Sorry for the bad commercial. It's more just about letting people know what an amazing week it is. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
one of my favorite things about like getting a new piece from euphonium.com is seeing like, oh, who are the artists for IET this year?
Mm,
Because it's like it's always like the craziest lineup. I mean, I feel
yeah.
kind of weird in that like I've kind of geeked out on euphonium artists since like day one because I
Mhm.
walked into my band. I don't know, is Brian Meixner somebody you know?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
We're contemporaries.
yeah, so Brian Meixner and Mark Carlson both went to my high school. So I walked into band the first day, and my director was like, "Here, son, you need this CD. He went to your high school and lived
Yeah.
down the street from you." And I'm like, "Who's this Brian Meixner guy?" And then like I went in, and the album he gave me was Genesis, the one where he plays like the
Hmm.
Ellerby and like all the classic reps. So I've been like,
Yeah.
it's nuts.
Yeah.
Like I've been like a weird nerd about this for forever.
Yep. And Mark Carlson
Yeah,
was one of the first IET participants in the first 2 years. We started out
heck
with
yeah.
14 people, and it's an interesting alumni list of people that were there in that first year and where they are.
Yeah, Jamie Lipton was there that year too,
Yep,
wasn't she?
she
Yeah,
was she
that's
was there.
gnarly.
Mark Carlson, Chris Buckley, Robert Pendergast,
Dang.
Ryan Black, who's a freelance player here, Emily Jones, who is a big freelance teacher over in Isle of Palms near Charleston, Charleston, South Carolina.
That's awesome.
It's pretty crazy to look through the history of that, and we're going to be posting a lot of that on our social media, different alumni and things. So it's pretty cool to see the longevity in the history of the event. And just like your band director pointing out to you, like, hey, you need to practice because there's history in this high school band for
Yeah.
euphonium. So don't mess up. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay.
But also like just I think there's a certain degree of pride that comes with it too. It's like there's history here and then also like well, one of the things I've talked to a lot of my friends about before, they're like, Andrew, why would you ever try for like a career in euphonium? I was like, I know two, three people from my high school who have like careers in low brass. At no point
Mhm.
did I think this was off the table.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Like,
well,
not only did
see,
one person do it, three people did.
yeah. Well, and nobody really. I had a lot of doubters. You remember I mentioned that trombone scoundrel professor's
Yeah,
guy's name was Phil Jameson. Actually, he's a scoundrel in a good way, and I still talk with him regularly. But he was like, "Oh yeah, I don't know if you can do anything like that." And I actually, it motivated me. I was like, "I will prove you wrong. I will do this."
yeah,
And so yeah, it was good motivator like that. So it's great to have that guide. And when we have a good inspiration or motivation and somebody who's sort of walked that path
mhm,
before, then that's something that's really, really lucky. I think the euphonium, the state of euphonium is at the high point that it's ever been because, I think back to when I was a student 25 years ago,
yeah,
that really and truly there were one or two people that were really successful. You had Brian Bowman, who's a full-time professor at Duquesne, and of course the military band people.
yeah,
And Steve Mead and the Childs Brothers were the soloist. I mean, there
yeah,
wasn't a lot going on then, but now you look at the prolific number of full-time professors, people that are doing a portfolio careers
yeah.
that have a variety of different aspects, solo careers, commissioning. I mean, it is a high time to be a euphonium player.
Yeah, I was I think in when Lance and I were talking, one of the things we talked about is like I'm really surprised at like how few young euphonium players, like players my age, are really that interested in military band anymore. Like a lot of people will
Mm-hmm.
take the auditions just to see like I kind of want to push myself, but I don't know that I want the gig that much. And I thought that was like kind of wild.
Yeah. I think the thing now is and at least when I was a student, everybody was like military band, military band, military band. And for me, doing the solo thing, there was much more flexibility. I
Hmm.
felt like certainly I could control things creatively and I like the entrepreneurial aspect
Yeah,
of the freelancing. And now again, in music business and entrepreneurship, the big buzzword is a portfolio career.
yeah,
And it can involve a lot of different things. It can involve some teaching, some playing, some
yeah,
podcasts, some influencer things, social media, could be a variety of different things. You can have a side gig at Starbucks
yeah,
or at a music store, adjunct at a university. Like this is a great time now that the state of
yeah,
euphonium is that many schools are deciding they want specialist instruction,
yeah,
and so they'll have a euphonium player be an adjunct there specifically for the euphoniums, and that is
yeah. I think we're at
phenomenal.
10 or 11 schools now that have full-time euphonium faculty.
Oh yeah, yeah, full time.
Or
Yeah.
maybe not full-time, but like specifically euphonium studio faculty, where it's not tuba and euphonium or trombone and euphonium, they're just euphonium, which is
Oh
actually
yeah,
like
yeah,
kind of special.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I believe that it may even be more because every now and then you see someone posting about, hey, I'm doing this.
Yeah,
Um, and actually, sort of along that line. So I teach at the University of North Georgia. I'm a associate professor there, and I'm full time there. But just a couple months ago, we negotiated with a dual appointment in the university system in the state of Georgia, and I'll be teaching graduate students, master's candidates at Georgia State University. So
heck
that's
yeah,
sort of a nice thing. So when I left there 7 years ago, they combined, they let Eric Bubash, who's a great friend of mine, he's been teaching the euphoniums. And then I've wanted to teach graduate students. And so it just worked out this very complex multi-month contract to teach graduate euphonium students
that's awesome.
got sorted out, and so that's sort of again another opportunity for people to study with euphonium specialists. So I think it's a great time to be a euphonium player without a shadow of a doubt.
Do you think the current conservatory model encourages young euphonium players to experiment enough?
In what regard? Like as far as sound or versatility or
Both.
career opportunities?
All yes to all.
Yes to all.
Yeah,
Yes.
like one of the things I've kind of discovered is that like I've kind of embarked on my own. Well, everybody embarks on their own educational journey, but I perform with a contemporary improvised ensemble here at
Hmm.
University of Illinois, and like I mean, we play weird music, man. It's real, and that's kind of the fun part is like embracing the experiment of live music,
Hmm.
especially when there's no sheet music. You show up, you commit to what's gonna happen, and it's either
Yeah.
like really bad, but sometimes it's really, really good. Like I've had a
Yeah.
couple of moments with this ensemble where I'm like, I think that's the best thing I've ever played.
Yeah. I
But
think the
and
spontaneity
yeah,
is amazing, and especially if you're with the right musicians that embrace, that
yeah,
aren't like, hey, did you crack a note there,
yeah,
or was that a wrong note? Like that doesn't happen in improvised music, but you
yeah,
understand.
yeah,
But are more like they feed off the energy of each other. So I
yeah.
think that that's awesome.
And exploring the sound of the horn in such a different way. To give you an idea of the group, it's like, well, last semester, we've added a couple of people this semester. Last semester, it was euphonium, French horn, berimbau, piano, oud, Foley artist, and whatever Nikolai brings.
Uh-huh. Hey, that's
It
cool.
was nuts. And so we've had moments where it's like, okay, people have like muted everything and we have this really like thin delicate texture where like
Hmm.
playing at pianissimo destroys everything. And so you
Yeah.
have to figure out like how can I contribute to this and play.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely. Especially with that instrumentation, the
yeah.
euphonium and French horn are really quite strong.
Yeah.
Um,
But like French horn can be stopped, right? And so
yeah.
then that like takes the gain so far down that it's like,
Hmm.
okay, like this can contribute in an interesting way. And it's really, really funky. And the
Hmm.
other wacky side is like not only playing like a tenor soloist, baritone soloist kind of role, but being the bass often is
Hmm.
really kind of interesting. Not something I've been tasked with very much.
Yeah. You know what could be interesting for that? I don't know if you've ever brought in a variety of mutes to
Yeah.
what you're doing, like whether it's metal mute or a wood mute, fiber mute, or like a Yamaha silent brass where you run
Yeah.
through like some pedals or something. It could be interesting
Yeah.
and sonically unique.
It's been interesting like seeing how this affects the solo music that I write because like I'll bell mount my euphonium kind of like
Hmm.
Irving Ray does and then like run
Hmm.
loads of processes through Ableton or yeah, I use
Cool.
fiber mute, metal mute. I've like put a Nalgene water bottle in my horn with like thumbtacks and stuff in it so it gets like buzz and all that kind of stuff. I'll like make a ball of aluminum foil and mute with that. I've done the Tim Busby like pour water in your bow kind of stuff.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
like just trying to experiment with the sound in every way I can in order to see like, okay, what's this thing capable of? Like, how can I
Yeah.
get inside this sound and bring something new here, change up the timbre a little bit? And it's really
Yeah.
interesting too, like going from like the super super lyrical perfect euphonium sound like wind band of like all the like large ensemble stuff I'm doing here on campus to like okay, I need to be able to leverage this like I need to like get inside the oud sound in order to play a counter melody with what Dimitri's playing or like I need to complement the berimbau for the bass line of this like Brazilian chart we're gonna play. It's
Hmm.
so wacky. I've never had to do anything like this before.
No, that's cool. You know, it's interesting. My professor at Georgia, David Randolph, his dissertation, I think in the early 70s, was on avant-garde techniques
Heck yeah.
for tuba in that time period. And I was just curious if anybody's done any type of update on avant-garde techniques for euphonium. I mean, there's been so many that have been developed recently. I don't
Mhm.
know if you know Sebastian Rosso from Colombia,
I don't think
but
so.
he did a really cool thing when we were I was down in Colombia, and he hooked up tubes, really long tubes, to his euphonium, and they broadcast around the concert hall like
Mhm.
30 feet of tube. And they were set up to different valves. It was a really, really cool, interesting thing. But
That's awesome.
there's lots of neat things, and I love that you're exploring that way. I have to say that I'm a little bit jealous because I've got three kids, as you can see over here. And I don't have as much time to explore sound and timbre as I used to.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of what we can do and what our instrument is capable and stuff. So I think a document that might give people more ideas could
Yeah.
be really cool.
Yeah, so the companion to the document that I'm making is a lecture recital at the end of the semester, where I'm going to go through all of this stuff and how it works and what it sounds like. And I have a planned list. So the way I'm setting up the orchestration document is I'm formatting it exactly like the Samuel Adler study of orchestration, so that
Hmm.
when composers get a hold of it, they go, "Oh, I know what this is. I know how this works. I know where to find stuff. This is gonna be great."
Yeah.
So starting with like ranges from like commonly accessible, like 3 valve versus 4 valve versus
Hmm.
compensating, and then like what's in tune, what's like a good range for like most euphonium players, what's a good range for like pretty good to like upper college division euphonium players, and then obviously elite euphonium players. One of the
Hmm.
things Hiram and I talked about was how like a lot of the concerti that a lot of college students want to play right now are some of the best music ever written for the horn, but are just like so out of the wheelhouse for what young players are really ready for.
Hmm.
And it really stinks because like the Anthony Barfield and Kevin Day concertos are two of the best things that may ever be written for euphonium. They're so good. Everything
Yeah.
about them is perfect. And it's
Yeah.
like a lot of young players I think are going to hurt themselves if they're trying to whale through those on a regular basis.
Yeah. But one thing I'll say about that though is that there's every there's always repertoire that's pushing the limits. And
Yeah.
and I can remember back when the Ellerby first came out and
Yeah.
Kozma first came out and Linkala first came out and like the Tim Jansa concerto and Alan Feinstein's concerto, those last two that I commissioned. Like everybody was like, these things are way too hard. Nobody's ever
Hmm.
going to be able to play that except for, 4 or 5 people. Stephen, Shoichiro, Adam, Yuka,
Yeah.
and Bob Childs, like stop commissioning such hard stuff.
Yeah.
And then you look back 10, 15 years later, they're on major competitions.
Yeah.
Undergraduates and graduate students are navigating them
Yeah.
and playing them well sometimes. And so I think it's just a matter of time
Yeah.
as the technique. But you raise a good point. Just because people can technically navigate the challenges
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that it's as musically gratifying or that it comes across as a finessed performance
Yeah.
and stuff. And so when I've commissioned a lot of pieces, one of the angles that I've tried to take recently is trying to develop more repertoire that's aimed for younger college students,
Yeah.
or just college students in general. Like William Brusick's Euphonium Concerto is a great piece. He's got a great tuba concerto, but it tops out at a high B natural and a couple pedal B flats, and it's
Yeah.
not a range destroyer. Bruce Fraser's
Yeah.
Euphonium Fantasy is another piece
Yeah. That's another
that
one
we
comes
did
to
as a
mind.
yeah, like specifically commissioned. I gave him, like, hey, I basically want the Kurnow Rhapsody on steroids, but I don't want it to be as awkward or complex as moments like in the Horowitz concerto. I'm
Yeah.
looking for something like that, and that's been on tons of international competitions.
Yeah.
We've had students win it in concerto competitions with orchestra and wind band. Like, I
Heck
mean,
yeah.
it's like it's a home run, because it's
Yeah.
getting played a lot. So
Yeah.
I think it's only a matter of time before people are playing the Barfield and the Kevin Day, but it is going to take time. And I will reinforce what you said. Don't injure yourself trying to play those things.
Yeah.
Like, be judicious with your practice and your breaks. And yeah.
Yeah, I think I put the Barfield together for the VTech competition in like
Mm-hmm.
6 weeks, and it like
Mm.
destroyed my face, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Having a good practice organization. I think that this is actually is something that my new book, The Game of Practice, sort of talks about, is like how you organize your practice with specific goals, and that you want to make sure that you're developing the components or the skills that you need for that. Like thinking that you're going to
Yeah.
magically get endurance to play crazy high stuff like that isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Versus if you have a very specific goal of like, hey, I'm going to
Yeah.
get where I'm successful with high A's and then B flat. So the other great
Yeah.
book that's wonderful for range development is Dave Vining's Range Songs, where he's
Yeah.
got 5 etudes that go to F, then 5 etudes G flat, then G, then A flat, all the way up to super F,
Yeah.
and do not pass go until you can do it. So, if B flat, if you top out at quality B flats, stick below that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's one of the things that I like about the organization of that. So I think
Cool.
a lot
Yeah,
of
I hadn't
people,
heard of Dave's book before.
oh, it's great.
One of the
Yeah.
ones I really like for range is the Byland flexibility studies because,
Yeah.
like, I mean, in within flexibility, in like pushing the range just a little bit, I like to go a couple of pages, then go back a little bit, and then go a couple of pages, and go back a little
Mm,
bit, and
yeah.
like work my way forward that way. I mean, I have a I'm a retired athlete, so
Uh-huh.
so like training in that way I find is really kind of interesting. Well, and to go back to your point, and I think this is to kind of objectify it a little bit for anybody that might be listening. If when we say like not tomorrow, like it takes a minimum of 4 months to build like good endurance. I think a minimum.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
And
it takes time.
anybody that tells you it's less than that is probably trying to sell you something.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I will let people know that Balin now has a bass clef edition instead of the
Oh
treble
heck yeah.
clef trumpet. Yeah, so that was a new thing that's been requested from Carl Fisher and Burkhalter Music. Be like,
Awesome.
can you guys make this into bass clef? A trombone, euphonium, tuba players, we'll play it if you do that. Like we can read
Yeah.
treble clef. So anyway, that's new as of maybe like November. So
Oh
that's
wow, I
cool.
didn't know that.
Yep,
That's awesome.
available at euphonium.com.
Of course.
Yeah. But no, you're right. Like endurance takes a long time, and students think that it's going to be quick. And just like you said about being an athlete, is that you don't develop athletic abilities super fast. It takes
No.
time. There's no fast overnight fix. And I want to make sure that all my students remember this. There's not a quick fix. You got to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a quick qualifier, like sometimes, like if you have a little bit of interference, like if I think you can have the illusion of a quick fix, but I think it's because like you have so much built up already, and there's
Mhm.
one thing that's not quite right, and that one little thing getting fixed will make it seem like a giant fix, but when you do that, really, you're kind of not giving yourself enough credit for all of the work you did beforehand.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's interesting things if you dig into behavioral habits and sort
Hmm.
of that, like you made a good point. You were doing three things right and one thing wrong. You did the one thing right, and all of a sudden everything's in alignment. So you're like,
Yeah,
man, this is fixed. This is awesome. But then what happens is a couple of days later, one of those other three aspects that was right
yeah,
before sort of drags down just a little bit, and so you got this uptrend, and then
mm,
you sort of hit a little bit of a plateau, and you might have a little bit of a downward trend because one of these
yeah,
other four aspects hasn't kept up with the other ones.
yeah.
So it's intriguing, and it can be really frustrating
Oh
for a
yeah,
lot of players too. Yeah. So
totally. To circle back to the original question that got us down
mhm.
this rabbit hole, though, do you think
Yeah.
young euphonium players or the current conservatory model encourages euphonium players to experiment enough? Because one of the things, and we've been talking about this a little bit, but I'm kind of the opinion now where it's like if we're not constantly breaking the mold, we're just going to entrench this idea that like euphonium plays in wind band and maybe in brass band, and that's kind of it. Even though there's like good orchestral rep that calls for you. Like, there's a lot of Strauss pieces that call for euphonium. Obviously, the
Yeah.
planets, the Janacek Sinfonietta. I mean, there's
Yeah.
like a lot of it.
Yeah, and actually, the Sarasota Opera and Ballet is doing Hershey K, who's American composers, very similar to Copland, wrote a Western symphony
Oh
that's
heck yeah,
got a great euphonium part. It's actually second trombone and euphonium together, but the euphonium part is very valve heavy.
that's awesome.
So yeah, so I'm going to get to play that later this spring and
Heck yeah,
stuff. And but yeah, there's tons of great rep, and you know, I don't think that the conservatory model really encourages people to explore a variety of things. We
yeah,
sort of get into the mentality of, hey, we need to do this standard repertoire that is generally uh, band-esque.
Mhm.
We need to make sure that we sound good for wind ensemble or symphonic band. There's really not a lot of scope for that. I feel like our whole music education system, that students are dramatically overburdened, both with core classes at the university level, plus the academic rigor of music theory and music history.
Yeah.
And they don't get enough creative time, especially as a
Yeah.
performer. This is a conundrum everywhere. I would love to see something where they have the ability to take more classes in creative improvisation,
Yeah.
or like a little bit less academic rigor. But the problem is, and I love my colleagues at the university, many times the academics, theory,
Mhm.
history, education, they're setting the curriculum.
Yeah.
It's not the performance professors. And
Yeah.
so they need 5 semesters of theory, 6 semesters of music history, or 4 semesters of
Yeah.
music history. And then, yeah, you can have one semester as an elective of improvisation. And
Yeah.
you're sort of like, what's going to happen later in life? Are you really going to need, sorry, Professor Morgan Ellis, who's my music history professor and one of my best friends? It's like, I'm sorry, I don't know how many semesters that we need of history for different areas.
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind for me is like, is it better to like cram everything you think they might need into a couple of semesters, or teach in such a way where they can't get enough of it and they start pursuing stuff on their own? Because then because then it's like, well, they're studying for forever. They're
Yeah.
in your class for forever.
Yeah.
They're going to stay in touch for forever.
Yeah.
Like, and then they're not lost, so to speak.
Yeah.
And because Sergio Carolino talks so much about how, like, if you want to be really great at something, you have to embrace the idea that you're never going to arrive, and you need to be learning
Mm.
all of the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things that I found really frustrating in my music history classes, even though my teachers were incredible, was like, okay, like I don't know that it's important for me to take a whole semester on like a Gregorian chant and classical forms. I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's cool, but like,
Yeah.
if I don't know, I don't think Mozart's that deep.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree. I agree as well. Like, I think one of the biggest problems we have in the music education conservatory model is that they sort of treat everybody sort of the same. Like, hey, you need to
Yeah,
learn about Gregorian chant, Renaissance, Baroque, classical, romantic,
yeah,
like all this different stuff, and you need to know this theory.
yeah,
I think I would like to see like more of an overview, and then
mhm,
and be able to have where the students can go to the pockets of information that they really need, that are unique to their areas.
yeah.
So
And
yeah.
I think like, uh I think changing some of the theory curriculum to make it a little more universal would help with that too. I'm taking jazz composition this semester, and one of
Hmm.
the things that I found is like, because my theory skills are so good, I when my professor will say like, okay, I need 5 charts, just lead sheets, but I need 5 charts by next Tuesday. I can do 5 charts by next Tuesday,
Yeah.
because by just studying the little bit of jazz that I have before this class and what we've done this semester, I can see the patterns of like, oh, this is a circle of fifths progression, or this is a 6-2-5-1 progression.
Yeah.
And it happens so much that I can harmonize it out, add some extensions if I wanted to give it some extra color, sing a tune over it that sounds like jazz, and I've got a chart. And
Yeah.
it's like pretty good.
Yeah.
And then reps will get me the rest of the way. And one of the things that I've been finding kind of frustrating is like, especially if rather than teaching music theory as like, this is a 1 chord, this is a 5 chord, just talk about like, okay, how can we interpret this music functionally? Let's just name the chord, whether if it's like
Yeah.
E flat 7 or whatever. If you want to call it German augmented 6, you can. But trying to really open it up so the language that we're describing music in isn't split into these different dialects, where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, we can objectively say that this chord falls into one of these 3 naming conventions.
Hmm.
Pick the one you want to use, and you need to know how to explain explain that it's also these other 2, so you can better communicate with other musicians. And then we can like try to create music that's interesting, and then you're not alienating like like the jazz people, for instance, by saying
Hmm.
like, oh, we have to call it one chords and five chords instead of just like tonic and dominant, which that's it's the same thing anyway.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
well, and from the composition side of stuff, there's like this, and I don't know if this is just like where I'm going to school, but I feel like the composers I meet are they're all about chamber music and orchestra, and like a lot of people aren't really that interested in writing for band or brass band or big band or jazz combo or whatever.
Hmm.
And I'm like, y'all are leaving so many reps and so many plays on the table. Like the more music I try to write, I think it just like raises all of the levels, because like writing for band has made my orchestral music way different because I try different textures.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it has to do with what people are comfortable with, and I
Hmm.
think a little bit of it may have with what, similar to your orchestration and arranging project, is that a lot of times people aren't as familiar with some of the band instruments, and so
Yeah.
they're like, "Hey, I'm going to sort of steer clear of that," or they know how
Yeah.
strings work. But no, you make a lot of great points that they're leaving opportunities on the table. But a lot of times I think people are very comfortable in their lane,
Yeah.
and they just sort of want to stay in that lane. And as long as it's working well,
Hmm.
then that makes a difference. I mean, I can personally say that, before I got a full-time university position, that you know being a part-time instructor, you had to hustle a lot more
Yes.
to for finances.
Hmm.
And you get a full-time university position, it's got benefits, it pays better and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And anyway, it makes things a little bit more comfortable. You have different responsibilities, but I think
Yeah.
composers do this. And like you said, I think at the end of the day, we want music to sound good, whether you
Yeah.
label it specific chords or they have this historical, neoclassical, neo-romantic style. We
Hmm.
want it to sound good and want people to want to listen to it. So I
Hmm.
think that that's where we want to be, but we put a lot of blockades in that, whether it's with the academic rigmarole, or
Yeah.
curriculum in some different ways.
Yeah, one of the I guess not a high horse, but like one of the one of the soapboxes I've been getting on recently is I think if you want to expand your lane, you need to. Like, I think a lot of people want to start at the end rather than starting at the beginning.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't feel like I could competently write for orchestra until April of this year.
Hmm.
And I mean, like I had taken orchestration before. I knew how to write for strings. I'd written a lot of chamber music for strings. I'd written a string quartet, but actually, I'd written a couple string quartets. But uh, I took an orchestration class taught by my composition teacher, Steve Taylor, where the way he taught it was like one part orchestration, one part musicology. And we did
Hmm.
some like little lectures, or like he'd give us handouts about like here's some clarinet stuff, or here's like some natural horn stuff, or here's some string stuff that we may need to review. But most of it was like, here's a Bach cantata piano reduction. I want you to orchestrate this for an orchestra Bach would have had access to.
Hmm.
And then here's a Haydn symphony piano reduction. It's 28 measures from
Hmm.
Symphony 40. I want you
Hmm.
to orchestrate this for an orchestra Haydn would have had access to. Then
Yeah.
Mozart, then Beethoven, then Wagner, then Brahms, then Mahler, and Debussy and Ravel. And we got, by the end, we had so many little reps of writing for orchestra. And we'd had, like,
Yeah.
I mean, at the beginning, we're having to write for like oboe, bassoon, natural horn, and flute were the only winds we got. And he'd say, like, okay, now when you orchestrate this, remember you have natural horn. So you can pick the horn that's in the key, or maybe you pick different ones for different reasons.
Yeah.
Why might you do that? And really having to like evolve with the orchestra and grow with it. And one of the things I came away with was I had found I had a really organic understanding of why orchestral
Hmm.
music is written the way that it's written.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people who are coming from an orchestral chamber music tradition and coming to write for band are just like looking at a couple of the hotshot composers of today. I mean, especially when you have a composer whose music is as powerful as David Maslanka's or John
Mm.
Mackey's, it's really easy to go like, oh, well, that's the best of the best. They sell like crazy. I'm going to study those guys. But they're coming from a very different tradition and
Mm.
they're standing on the shoulders of very different giants. And
Yeah.
so I have a bit of a playful, not quite trick question for you. What do you think is the most performed piece of band literature from any genre?
Uh, probably Leroy Anderson's Sleigh Ride.
I think that's a really good guess. My assessment is it's the Stars and Stripes Forever.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Stars and Stripes, because that
Yeah,
would
it
be at
has to be.
military. Yeah,
It
yeah, yeah.
has to
Yeah,
be. But
definitely.
this raises,
Definitely.
exactly. But this raises like a really interesting question of all of these people are coming to write for band and they're not studying the most performed piece for
Yeah,
band.
yeah. Star Spangled Banner would have to be up there as well, you
Yeah,
know.
I mean,
So
if nothing else, they're on so many military band concerts,
yeah,
like
yeah,
every military band concert, every
yeah,
military band ceremony, and
yeah.
then not to mention like all of the Fourth of July community band
Yeah.
gigs.
Now, I will say this much. I wasn't thinking about military bands when I said
Yeah,
that. So I think if you qualify it for high school bands, and Sleigh Ride's
yeah,
got to be there, because
yeah. I
everybody
think that.
loves the slapstick.
Oh yeah, I think that's really high up there too. But I mean, there's a lot of high school bands who will play Stars and Stripes because
Oh,
like
yeah.
it's a difficult march.
Yeah.
But I think this begs a really or like creates a really interesting point of, okay, if you're just studying the contemporaries, do you really understand like what everything is capable of? And when I
Yeah.
was talking with Hiram about this, he's like, well, is that's not really like high art, so like why would people study that? And my thesis is kind of like, well, it doesn't matter that it's high art. It's the most efficient way of understanding what everything in the band is
Hmm.
good at.
Yeah.
Like even if the only two pieces you studied were like that and Lincolnshire Posy for like the
Mm.
historical wind band tradition, like you learned so much about like what it's capable of and how
Hmm.
it's asked for stuff. And honestly, like what band directors want in a piece.
Yeah. Yeah. And you learn to avoid all the mixed meter in the third movement of Lincolnshire Posy and soprano saxophone, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like, there's a lot of moments in Lincolnshire Posy, especially with the mixed meter, where I think it's like really artistically
Oh,
gratifying.
yeah. It
It's
is.
just,
It
it's
is. It
just
is.
like, is 1.5/4 the best way to write 3/8?
Yeah, 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 yeah. The other thing I was gonna say, to circle back to your talk about the composing and arranging,
Mhm.
is that I think a lot of times students don't understand how many times they have to do something to get good at it, especially with
Yeah,
composition and arranging. I mean, I was talking with one of my buddies, and at his program, composition students do a composition seminar freshman and sophomore year, and they don't start individual composition lessons until their junior, senior year. But then they graduate with a degree in composition. It's like,
that's
hold on,
nuts.
you're telling me that you're supposed to be able to compose after doing that. So I've had a couple of my high school and early college students, and they're like, "Oh, I want to do composition." I was like, "Well, you better start right now." And they're like, "Well, I don't know if I have my full ideas." I was like, "Listen,
Yeah,
uh, do you know anybody who plays any of the first 20 Mozart symphonies on a regular basis? How many Beethoven symphonies are regularly programmed and stuff like that?"
yeah,
Like, I mean, these guys were, the pinnacles, and
yeah,
yet there's tons of works of theirs that don't get programmed, and there are a lot of the early ones. And so you
yeah,
need to understand, and I said this very frankly to one of my students. It's like, listen, your first compositions are going to be bad,
yeah,
so it's okay. You'll probably burn them later or delete the finale files, but just
yeah.
know that it's a process to get there.
Yeah,
uh,
well, and especially in the computer age, like if like a conductor or performer asks you to change something about your piece, the beautiful thing of save as, just create another version. Run with what they ask about. If you
mm,
hate the piece, keep the old one. Maybe
yeah,
you'll find somebody who wants to play that version. But like
yeah.
I don't think like the idea of killing your darlings looks so much different now than it used to because like
Mm,
that time isn't wasted.
yeah. Yeah, no, and the other thing I was going to say to you about studying the masters, I remember uh, early on when I would commission composers to write things, I had a pack that I would literally send them that had solo parts from 4 or 5 different pieces.
Yeah.
I would send them my recordings, some sample recordings of highlights from orchestral things, like, just to give them, because one of the things I liked was to find a composer that didn't know a lot about euphonium.
Yeah.
And there's a great story with Alan Feinstein's concerto that in one of the cadenzas, he wrote it up to a top E natural. And I was like, if you can do an F or an E flat, that will be better than a top E natural. And he goes, Adam, I've never had anybody ask me to write a more extreme note than what I've written. I was like, well, I'm just letting you know, for euphonium, super E natural is terrible, and I can do an F much more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And it's
Yeah.
funny, like that's kind of the just like figuring out the ergonomics of writing for the horn. This brings up an interesting question for me though. Like, how do you think composers could utilize the euphonium better, especially in their solo work?
Are you talking specifically about solo repertoire, like wind band orchestral
I
pieces?
think, well, right now, I think solo repertoire, but I'd
Yeah.
like to get into wind band and orchestra stuff maybe in a second.
Yeah, so I think, for composers, the best way to utilize euphonium is, like mid-high range, beautiful melodies, from mid F up to high G is just like where the euphonium is glorious, I
Yeah.
think. And then the dexterity of the instrument I think is really unmatched.
Hmm.
And But again, trying to use it in the most functional range.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I would say, and this is sort of like general advice, is really make sure that whatever the texture of the accompaniment is, whether it's piano, wind band, orchestra, brass band, that it's not too thick.
Hmm.
The concert that I played last night, one of the pieces I made the orchestration. I did this back early in my career that I felt like all these pieces had such thick textures, and I was like, I'm
Hmm.
just going to make my own so they're nice and thin, and I can project and not have to work too hard.
Hmm.
And I think that those are the big things. And then as far as the wind band repertoire and orchestral repertoire, well, for orchestral repertoire, just please write for euphonium. And then for the wind band repertoire, I think giving it the opportunity to shine as a solo instrument, because it can soar so wonderfully and it's so unique.
Yeah.
But then also to have it work in teams, like really great composers, they'll have the euphonium teamed up with the clarinets or the horns. Like,
Yeah.
it's so flexible around the group, that I like to see it working as a chamber musician among the other instruments of the wind band.
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of composers would get a lot from if they just changed a little bit of their philosophy of writing for wind ensemble is that it's the Sousa band operated as like 40 chamber groups and then
Yeah,
came together as the Sousa band.
yeah.
And in following that tradition, not only do you get this like kind of more eclectic palette of colors you can draw from, but it really
Mhm.
encourages experimentation with the colors and the timbres of the
Mm,
ensemble.
yeah.
And trying to make like, okay, the chamber group I'm gonna have for this section of my piece is gonna be euphonium, alto clarinet, muted trumpet and marimba. Like, so
Yeah.
let's see what happens.
Yeah.
It could be really interesting and like hear how all of those different instruments blend together in that way. And I don't, I see a lot of, especially now, like I'm playing with the Illinois Wind Symphony right now, which is like one of the oldest wind ensembles in the country. And
Hmm.
it's like, it's really interesting seeing some of the new rep that we're playing right now and how
Hmm.
like, oh, y'all studied like six pieces and didn't really try anything that wild.
Hmm.
But then like this so I played a concert on Friday evening and the program was like super eclectic. We played Joel Puckett's flute concerto, we
Hmm.
played the Jim Stevenson Second Symphony, Ida Gutkovsky's Poème de Feu. I don't know if you know that piece. That's got the craziest. It's so there's a spot where it's three euphoniums, not just one, not just two, three
Wow.
individual parts.
Wow.
Yeah, the piece is awesome. But like there's this spot in the second movement where the run that she wants is F sharp to D sharp to or F sharp to G sharp to A natural to B natural to
Hmm.
C. And
Yeah.
it's doubling the saxophones at pace for a page.
Oh, wow. Wow. So
And like
my
really
question
really
on that.
drilling it is like okay, that shift of two to two and four to four and really getting that dexterity like crazy
Yeah.
was nuts. It was
Yeah.
fun prep though.
Yeah, there's a for that particular valve combo. I actually have an exercise in the game of practice called the Punisher, and it's 14 different valve combos of where you have to cycle them at eighth notes, triplets, 16th sextuplets, and then 30 seconds and stuff, and
That's
pick all
awesome.
these awkward combos. But I would love to know from that composer why or what inspired them to have three separate parts. Like there has to be some, either the band that they tested it with had like a crazy euphonium section, or they have
Mm,
a friend that's a euphonium
my
player.
guess
Um,
is so Ida Gutkovsky studied in Paris with Nadia Boulanger. My
okay.
assessment is she was probably writing for the wind ensemble at the Paris Conservatory, which was
Mm,
colossal and awesome.
yeah.
Probably definitely a descendant, if not almost the same group that Florence Schmidt wrote Dionysiacs for.
I was gonna say, yeah.
And Dionysiacs had like sousaphone parts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, the other history of that could also be
mhm,
in contemporary ensemble at Georgia. We played a lot of Varese,
mhm.
and there'll be two, three crazy individual tuba parts in many of his pieces. And so I wonder if there's just a history of having that level of independence and
Mhm.
the quality of low brass players that they can do that. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got Debussy writing the sight reading etudes for your students at the Paris Conservatory, I imagine they're like pretty good.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. French conservatories got a lot of amazing rep over the years.
Oh
Yeah,
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 and that's one of the really interesting things. I wish people like not only performed more of that kind of repertoire, but studied that kind of repertoire because like
yeah,
this idea that the wind ensemble plays like marches all of the time is like kind of ridiculous, especially when there's pieces like Poème de Feu, Dionysiacs, or I don't know if Rolf Rudin is a composer you're aware of.
yeah,
His wind
yeah.
ensemble music is nuts in a
Oh yeah,
really cool way.
yeah, yeah. I'm trying to remember. He's got amazing stuff. I remember obviously he wrote the Hallows Euphonium Concerto.
Yeah.
But there's another piece that he wrote. It was one of his big, huge wind band pieces. I can't think of the name now, but I remember I heard it and was just immediately struck by how amazing it
Yeah,
is.
the Druids is well, it's called Die Druden, but the Druids
Yeah,
is
that's
really
what it is.
cool.
Yeah,
The unraveling of the soul upon death is incredible. Like, I mean,
yeah.
all of his one ensemble
It's got a
music
great
is like
title.
exhilarating. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
And I love like how romantic it is. Like
yeah,
romantic in the style of it's like mythological and visceral and like
yeah,
kind of like from another portal of humanity almost. It's like it's really cool.
yeah. I met him and his wife at Midwest, and he's
Oh,
super
awesome.
approachable, really, really nice guy and stuff like that. So anyway, very
That's
cool.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like I find myself wishing a lot that people looked at more repertoire like that in order to just kind of figure out like, okay, like what's euphonium capable of? So, what do you love unconditionally about euphonium?
The sound. Yeah. The sound and the virtuosity that it's capable of. Like you can have a tough day or be frustrated and you pick it up and play a great melody and you're happy. Um, I think also to me the sound can touch the soul a little bit more effectively than a lot of the other instruments. Like trumpet, flute, like they're heroic, but at the same time a little bit like in your face.
Yeah.
I feel like euphonium sort of has that level of warmth and comfort and intimacy
Yeah.
that you know nourishes you, and me at least.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Something I'm curious about. Do you find that the modern euphonium is closer to the historic baritone sax horns? That's something I've noticed in terms of how they're set up and the roundness of the sound, because the original rotor euphoniums that were built in Central Europe are, I mean, there's obviously they're still used. Miraphone makes a really interesting one that sounds really cool. Yeah.
Right there, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love those horns, but
Just a
like
second, let me grab it off the wall and show it real quick because some
cool.
people probably haven't seen one before.
So for anybody who's just listening, Adam is holding an ovular looking euphonium that looks very like if you looked up a Wagner tuba, something like that, but with a much larger mouthpiece.
Mhm. Yeah, and man, it needs to be cleaned. This is a 60th anniversary model that Miraphone did to celebrate them making these for their 60 years and stuff. It's actually bright silver plate, but it's really tarnished because it hangs on the wall. It's got all the gold accents. Which, anyway, it's a beautiful
Yeah.
instrument. It's great. Mahler 7 and stuff. It's actually my dream to play. It's a little sacrilegious, but I would really love to play the planets on this horn because
Yeah, that'd be cool.
the bell direction for sitting in the orchestra, this will go out to the audience, to the concert hall. And yeah, there was one orchestra I played it on, and they moved me from sitting on the right side where the bell is pointing out. They moved me over back by the harp
What?
because
That's
yeah,
crazy.
well, the conductor egged me on to play really strong, and he loved it. And then when at sound check or at break, we asked the assistant conductor, and he goes, "Whenever the tenor horn plays, I hear nothing else." And I was like, "Is that a bad thing?"
Yeah, good.
So yeah, I think uh,
Ryan Robinson and I talked about that at the Eastman Tuba Academy a couple of years ago. And that's something
mhm.
I've been really trying to wrap my head around a little more, especially as I've come back to playing at university, because I've I've noticed that the euphonium timbre and the saxophone timbre are a lot closer than I've ever given it credit for.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think mainly in the U.S. we don't spend a lot of time really knowing the sax horn
Yeah.
or the English baritone or a real baritone horn, and how those sounds are different. But I will give this one heads up. So for people that aren't specialists, they have a hard time telling the difference.
Yeah.
There's two funny stories that when my wife and I we first got married, we moved in a neighborhood, and we had a block party like 2 months after we were there. And we're in the cul-de-sac talking to people, and said, "Oh yeah, we moved into the house up there." And the gal goes, "Oh, I hear music coming from your house sometimes." And I was like, "Yes." And she goes, "Do you have like a son or daughter that's like a middle school saxophone player or something like that?" And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "No, we don't have kids." And they're like, "Well, what do you do?" And I was like, "Well, actually, I'm a musician and I travel around the world and I'm sort of good." And she was horrified. But the other funny thing is that I played for a guy one time. It's actually my wife's dad, who's not a musician, but I played this double bell euphonium here, and I was like, "How does this compare?" Like, and he goes, "It sort of sounds the same as the tuba in your modern euphonium and your wife's French horn." And I was like processing for a little bit. I was like, I guess because my ears are attuned to those timbre differences that I mean they sound black and white to me.
Yeah.
But for him, and he's listened to band and for when his daughter's in school and stuff like that. And he's like, "Yeah, they all sort of sound the same to me." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, cul-de-sac gal thought I was a middle school saxophone player and stuff like that." It's like, that hurts. That hurts just a little bit.
Yeah, that actually brings up a really interesting question. So one thing, a kind of one of Hiram's kind of hot takes, I guess, is that like it's he thinks it's basically impossible to be like an S tier wind band player and an S tier brass band player because the
Hmm.
role of the euphonium in both of those ensembles is so different.
Hmm.
Because his philosophy, and I'm sure Dr. Bowman's philosophy, because like that's where he studied, is the euphonium needs to have like this perfect core of sound at all times and in all
Yeah.
registers, so that like it's always blending with anything that it's paired with. But that in brass band, because you have to change color so much to be able to create contrast within parts of a piece or what have you, like that is the role is so different that it's becomes impossible to really keep one foot in each camp to like the highest degree. And I was wondering what you
Yeah.
thought about that.
No, I mean, I think the problem is a lot of times people number one, I think a great musician who's got flexible sound and skills, they can excel in all those different areas. I mean, obviously
Mhm.
somebody who just spends time playing in brass band is likely going to have a better skill set at
Oh,
that,
sure.
in the same as somebody who's always in wind band or soloist. But I think the ability to sit down and blend and adjust is a skill set that great
Mhm.
musicians have.
Yeah,
And that they can sit down and you can give the fire of the brass band that you
yeah,
need. And then you can blend, like we were talking about, like, hey, I'm gonna be in sync with the clarinets or the French horns in
yeah.
the wind band. And then at this one moment, I'm going to be on top of the ensemble because I have a solo. Then at
Mhm.
another point in time, you're not going to hear me because I'm playing octaves with the tubas.
Yeah,
I think it has to do with processing and awareness of what you're supposed to be doing at that
yeah.
particular time.
And
Yeah.
I want to be really clear, just in case there's some weirdo listening. I'm not trying to create points of contention or conflict or anything. I was just interested what you thought about that.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I think you know, you can hear people move between genres, whether it's the easy one to point out would be classical music and jazz music. But I mean, there's
Yeah,
so many things like is it Latin? Is
yeah,
it avant-garde? Is it like, John Williams heroic trumpet playing?
yeah,
Or is it Schindler's List introspection?
yeah,
Like it's all these different things. And I think developing that character in your playing and the ability to adjust, whether it's timbre, your dynamic palette, your articulation palette, like
mhm,
within this realm, this is the box of articulations that I would use. And of course it's going to be different in brass band because it's to me uh more extreme isn't the right word, but that the higher dynamics are stronger, the
yeah,
softer dynamics are softer. When you talk about staccato, I mean, it is secco, secco, secco.
yes,
And just that level of precision versus in wind bands, sometimes it doesn't have to be as short. If you
mhm,
get as loud, it's not within this sound character of the woodwinds that are there.
yeah,
So I think you want to develop a variety of skills and sonic palettes so
mhm,
that you can fit into those ensembles, and it is possible. But I will say this much: uh, it takes a lot of skill to develop that
yeah,
flexibility.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing I think I've appreciated the most about playing in contemporary music ensemble.
Mm.
Like it's made my ears gnarly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And especially like in a chart where we could move from in an 8 minute piece, move from like an ambient drone based piece to like a Greek groove to jazz to like a thin like avant garde textural thing to like me pulling like a Civil War folk tune out of nothing and somebody just like starts narrating a poem over the top of it. Like I've had to do the wildest shift changes
Yeah.
and it's
That's cool.
I found it to be like so liberating for my brain in
Hmm.
terms of thinking like, well, what do we need here? And
Yeah.
I think also trying to, like you mentioned earlier, trying to take character from other instruments to be more specific about like how we want to execute something. This comes up in like wind symphony sectionals all the time, where we'll see
Hmm.
like staccato quarter notes versus staccato eighth notes in a passage
Hmm.
and saying like, okay, we need to differentiate this from like bowed staccato versus pizzicato.
Yeah.
And we have to create a difference that way. It doesn't matter that the composer hasn't written that. It says a lot about us that we're making that distinction just by looking at this on the page
Yeah.
because there's enough information here for us to glean that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that if you're surrounded by a variety of sound exploration like you're talking
Yeah.
about, you're going to feel free to do that. I mean, versus if there's this expectation to play accurately and don't mess up in
Yeah.
like high school band,
Yeah.
then you're probably going to stay in a little more compact box, you
Hmm.
know. So, but I think each situation has its own merits and where you're going to be like trying to extend yourself or
Yeah.
just be part of the ensemble. I think it's a conundrum for players without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, I think it's the one of the most powerful things you can do is embrace like a multifaceted role. And that took me so long to figure out. And I wish I had like figured it out sooner because I think I would have appreciated my bachelor's degree more or like my ensemble
Mhm.
time in my bachelor's degree more. Spent so much time worrying about like, okay, like I don't like this piece very much. I don't do very much in it, which I mean is frustrating in its own right. I'm not saying that it's not, but like understanding that like being a cog in the machine of an ensemble really opens your mind to the idea of like how much more depth can we add to this.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then when you get a time to shine so much that people are like, we've got to get pieces with better euphonium parts.
yeah. That's true. That's true too. Very true. Very true.
I think it all comes back, and like you said, it all comes back to listening. Where do you see the euphonium going over the next 20 to 25 years?
Um, I mean, there's so many opportunities.
Yeah.
I continue to see the proliferation of new repertoire and tied to a lot of new younger artists as defined by anything from like 20 to 35.
Mhm.
And that there continues to be this development of repertoire. I see a lot more people being able to have the portfolio careers, where at least in America and in other places, that there's specialized euphonium instruction. I mean, you see this
Mhm.
happening all over the world. That they're getting people that are teach euphonium players to teach euphonium players instead of
Mhm.
trombone and tuba players. And my teacher at Georgia, Dave Randolph, he was a tuba player. He wasn't a euphonium player. And there's tons of people that have turned out just fine that way. But it is nice to have the specialist instruction.
Mhm.
So I see employment opportunities increasing. As far as those types of jobs, I think that there's more opportunities, especially again stateside, where euphonium players are founding brass bands and educational programs around brass instruction. And I see that as a really positive job opportunity. Like, it you can literally see where there would be a niche for somebody to move to a metropolitan area, contact the universities, let them know that their specialist euphonium adjunct is available, uh, start a community brass band because they have knowledge as a euphonium player, and then sort of set up shop to do specialized euphonium instruction on the high school level and middle school level as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I see that as a truly viable employment model for a lot of students, and we see success of that like on a regular basis right now. So I could cite a lot of different names,
Mhm.
and I'm intimately familiar with like three or four different former students of mine that are doing not exactly that, but a lot of the same components are there. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's there.
How has the entrepreneurial side of your career enhanced the artistry you bring to the horn?
Oh, I would like to think a lot, because
And I
in
want to be really clear about this. I don't mean just like in like bringing new repertoire. Obviously, you do lots of that. You've commissioned
yeah,
like more works than almost anybody I can think of. But like, I mean, like, how has being? I think of like real entrepreneurs as being artists as well as business people, especially if they're really good, because you have to have a significant creative vision. And I
yeah,
guess the thing I'm thinking about is how has being an interdisciplinary artist enhanced your euphonium playing?
yeah. So, well, I think in a lot of different ways. So, number one is looking for opportunities, like not just to recreate what somebody else is doing.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, doing those first recordings with the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra many years ago and developing orchestral repertoire, both arrangements and compositions, was a new area that I did a lot of playing with orchestras many moons ago. And I think also developing new areas like in South America, like not just trying to do the same thing. And that's informed my euphonium playing because when you play as a soloist with orchestra, you have to have higher levels of accurate intonation, because strings, the band for good intonation with strings is like this narrow. Wind band is sort of here, brass band is a little bit bigger, and stuff. And then you also have to have different level of skills that you orchestral conductors don't always think of tempos the same way that band conductors do. So sometimes you find yourself having to explore either longer phrases, shorter phrases, like don't complain about having to play fast. Like, look, the first violins can play this just fine, so get on with it. And you're like, I think also having the variety of experiences that I've been able to have over the years of working with doing obviously orchestra stuff, very unique, lots of stuff in South America and with composers there that write music in a different way. Fernando Moraes from Brazil, Jorge Tagliapietra from Argentina have written a couple pieces, and they're different. So you have to develop different sounds, different skills. And for me, that gives me the opportunity to program a wider variety of music, and I think that makes you more versatile. But it's because you took the chance to meet these people, to ask them to write, to go work at this festival in whether it's Argentina or Colombia or something like that. So I think that's a lot of ways that's influenced my playing. And then finally is that, when you have a really broad network base, you get different unique opportunities. Whether it's to work with a military band in Singapore, or there's a lot of different things. And whenever you have that versatility, similar to what you said with your improvisation ensemble, like you're getting pushed to your limits because there's different demands, and that happens for me, and I like it a lot.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Have you participated musically in any of the places where you've gone to climb mountains?
I'm trying to think.
Because
Well, in
for
Jeju,
everybody,
yeah,
for
yeah.
anybody who doesn't know, Adam is a prolific mountain climber.
Yeah. I got my certificate from Kilimanjaro right here.
What? That's awesome.
Yeah, it hangs directly over my desk from going to the top of Kilimanjaro.
Is that like one of the most motivating things that you could have around? I feel like that would be something that's like, yeah, I did that. I have my marathon medal sitting on my desk, but kind of like where I write.
That's awesome. Yeah, let's see, we'll turn this around here real quick. So we got the Kilimanjaro certificate. We got a picture of the baby. This is going across the equator from the Galapagos when I went diving and hiking there. U.S. Army Orchestra, my daughter Olivia, picture of David Randolph up there at the top. This is a workshop that I did with Øystein Badsvik and Håkon Bjorkman in Norway. Wow. This is from the Midwest Clinic up there when I played with Kell High School Band. It's all signed by the band. And then this super charming photo of my other daughter and baby Barrett. And this is a crystal bracelet that they made, and for all 5 of us in the family. And each of the different colors, the little girls all had different meanings for each of the different colors on the beads that they chose. So anyway, it's actually really cool. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I've done some music stuff out in Colorado when I've been hiking up there, and then obviously some of the stuff up in Maine and in New Hampshire and outside Boston and stuff. I've not done anything in Tanzania, but I have done some stuff in South Africa, and then obviously in Jeju, although the mountain there is not really like a mountain. I mean, it's a volcano, but it's really short. But I'll have to think about doing some more hiking. I do want to go I'm not ever going to do Everest and stuff, but I would like to
Everest
maybe
has
get to
kind
the
of
base
gotten
camp.
like cliche, hasn't it? Like there'd be like, I mean, for anybody, I'm not going to get into the details. And if anybody can go look up like how disastrous hiking Everest is, because that's all anybody wants to do. I think Kilimanjaro would be, especially because I've heard your like talk about how practicing is like mountain climbing. That seems like a really cool place to go see.
So when we did Music for All, did I do the slideshow on
I think
Kilimanjaro?
I think it was when it was brand new.
that would have been
Yeah,
probably, yeah,
you
yeah.
rolled up, played the fast movement of pantomime, and then gave that talk. And we were like, this is the craziest thing we've ever seen.
That's great. Man, I've not done the Kilimanjaro talk. So for those of you that don't know, I basically drew parallels between hiking Kilimanjaro and learning a monumental piece and making sure you have the right equipment, which are the skills to play the instrument, and then also having the mental fortitude to get through it. Yeah, that was a really great class, or I at least thought it was, and stuff like that. And the fact that you remember it is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
especially, I might have been 16 when I
yeah,
saw that talk. And it's like,
yeah,
I think it's so it's subjective in all of the right ways and objective in all
yeah,
of the right ways to really
yeah, yeah,
capture like, what do you need? How are
yeah,
you going to get there? Do you have a plan? Do you just
yeah,
love it? Like,
yeah, yeah.
and that's just really nuts. When I was prepping to run my first marathon, which I ended up doing way better than I ever anticipated I would do.
Awesome.
But like, uh, I didn't think it would be, oh, if you can run a 5K almost every day, you can get to like a really good marathon pace in 4 months.
Hmm.
That seemed too short. I
Yeah,
thought I would need like years and years of training.
yeah,
Well, so much. I mean, and some of it was like I had run some longer races before, but I'd never run longer really than a half marathon or maybe 15 miles. And so the idea of like I'm gonna go do 26 miles in one sitting in one day in under 4 hours, that's nuts.
yeah.
And all of the and like going really intense with the prep for it and trying to make sure everything was in line. There's nothing like going off processed sugar for 2.5 months and then having that first sip of chocolate milk after the race. It's like psychedelic, man.
I'm sure. I'm sure. You know, the funny thing about that Kilimanjaro story, I just thought about it when you said that, was that there was a guy, and this relates to brass instruments. People are always like, "Oh, I need a better instrument,"
Mhm.
and stuff like that. And I got to tell you, even the I love my Yamaha here, but like new instruments don't always mean that you're going to get to the top. There was a
Yeah.
Spanish guy who so proudly told us on the first day that he had just spent like 350 euros on new hiking boots, and he'd not broken them in, and he got
Jeez.
blisters on his feet. And
Yeah.
it was like, hey, just because you got the new fancy shoes,
Yeah.
you didn't follow the advice of everybody. Like, hey, and it did say on the equipment list, well broken in hiking boots.
Yeah.
And the guy's like,
Yeah.
look at these brand new shiny boots.
Yeah, I watched a video with Des Linden talking about like how she likes to write or like break in running shoes before a race.
Mm-hmm.
And this is before I ran my marathon. And one of the things she talked about was I do a couple recovery runs in them, but I don't do a
Mm-hmm.
full run in them
Yeah.
because I really only want them to have like 9 to 10 miles of wear. So they're
Yeah.
still at as close to maximum cushion as possible.
Yep.
But I
Yeah.
know that's like not that different. And if you're staying with the same model of shoe, like obviously there's not going to be that many crazy differences. But
Yeah.
one thing I never thought about is like, your brain is doing all of these subconscious calculations that like
Yeah.
nobody's ever aware of because like, they're involuntary.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. This is how I like figured out how break-in periods work on horns because I was thinking like, okay, well if you switch from like Asics to Brooks, for example, like Brooks wear so differently and hit the
Mm-hmm.
ground so differently, like your brain has to recalculate a lot of what's going on, and that can
Mm-hmm.
like that learning period, that break-in period can really like mess you up a little bit if you go too hard too early. And I think going to euphoniums is the same way because like I mean especially if you're going from like Yamaha to Besson or whatever, like or
Mm-hmm.
to insert brand here that doesn't exist yet, like the odds that they blow pretty differently, even like a small degree, is pretty high, even if it's just like
Oh
some
yeah.
differences in the intonation, the harmonic series, or the internal taper, or maybe a little pipe is like a little wider than something else. Your brain has to recalibrate all of the subconscious calculations that it might have spent decades on
Decades.
in
Yeah.
order to figure out like, okay, how's this going to work? Just in the same way that like a kid learns that like, oh, if I kick this ball, it will go towards that wall, and if I kick it hard enough, it will hit the wall and bounce back. but it'll
Hmm.
take a little bit for me to figure out how far. But it doesn't, like, the child doesn't have to calculate all of that physics.
Yeah.
And if we employed some collegiate physics students, it would take them a few days to get,
Yeah.
like, how hard do you need to kick this in order to make that
Hmm.
happen? The human brain can just figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that is true. People with instruments, like once they've played on an instrument, like I had a high school student here a number of years ago, and there's two counties, and one county basically uses Yamaha euphoniums, and the other county on the bid list is Besson euphoniums. And the kid played Besson in middle school, in high school, and he wanted an instrument. I was like, well, the best, and you're gonna like the best. And he goes, no, but you play Yamaha. I want to play on the Yamaha. And it's like, you can try my horn. I said, but when
Mm.
you play on a Besson, it's gonna feel more comfortable because you played on the Besson.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had another student who he grew up on Yamaha, and when he was ready to buy a professional euphonium, I was like, you're gonna like Yamaha. He goes, no, I want to get a Besson. I was like, I'm telling you, you're gonna like a Yamaha. And so he ordered a Besson, waited on it, got it, played on it, and the next day the mom was like, I think we want to test out a Yamaha. And I was like, hey, we have so many good euphoniums now. I said,
Yeah.
it's personal preference, and it's exactly what you're talking about. It's a little bit about what your history has sort of
Yeah.
gotten you to feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
The way that it wears and stuff. So the one good thing, at least for that student, was that Besson had a price increase since he had bought it. So he actually got to sell it at a profit. I think a three hundred
What?
dollar
Oh, dude,
profit.
that's
Yeah, he
awesome.
did. Well, I mean, the instrument
Yeah.
was still brand new and
Oh,
stuff.
sure.
So anyway, yeah, it actually was really funny, and it turned out great. And it only would have been better if these two shopping experiences had happened at the same time. But it's funny.
Yeah,
I
they could have
just said
swapped.
they could have just swapped and it all would have been good. But they were a couple years apart. But they were very similar. It's like, would you play on in middle school? This is what you're playing on now. Have you ever
Mhm.
played on any other instruments? And they're like, no. And it's like, well, I'm just letting you know, this is where you're gonna groove. You're gonna like this and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then and then when you get to the point where you have enough specific opinions about what you're trying to do that you can go to a conference, try out every horn and figure out, like, okay, which one blows exactly the way I want it to.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
different. Well,
Yeah.
and we were
Yeah.
talking a little bit about this at Mortec. I think I've gone, like, too far into the rabbit hole. I'm trying to, like, quantify, like, when I play a new horn, I'm, like, quantifying in my brain, like, how does this vibrate differently, and can I feel that the internal taper is different between euphoniums?
Yeah.
Because I've taken so many apart and put them back
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. 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 No, I'm more of if it feels right, then
Yeah.
and it sounds great, then life is good. Life is good.
Yeah, I've been really working on trying to get back to that. I feel
Yeah.
like I've, like, red pilled. Wow, that's kind of a problematic phrase to use,
Analysis
I
by
guess.
or
Yeah,
paralysis by
yeah,
analysis, without a shadow of a doubt.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
I've gone too far into the rabbit hole about it, but it's been really fascinating and, like, trying to
Yeah.
explore, like, how every euphonium blows a little differently. I
Oh
still
yeah.
think, like, the miraphone blows crazy. It's like
Yeah.
nothing I've ever played. It's such a wild
Yeah.
instrument in a cool
Yeah,
way.
we're thankful, like at this point in time, that there's a lot of different great instruments,
Yeah.
and that they play differently. They have different aspects to them, and that's a wonderful thing, because somebody that
Yeah.
likes this can have that instrument. Somebody that likes that goes here. Somebody who likes this goes that other way. But I think the main thing is to figure out what you want, and then try a variety of different instruments so you can
Yeah.
sort of see what works best for you. Yeah,
Definitely.
right.
What do you like to play when you don't have anything specific to practice? Or what do you like, and or what do you like to play
Nintendo
when you
Switch. No, I'm joking.
or what do you like to play when you're playing euphonium to unwind rather than to work?
Oh, just some nice melodies. I like good little melodies, little lullabies that I sing to my kids, or yeah, that I think that's like my go-to. That used to be, my wife would always know when I was done practicing, because after I'd work on a bunch of stuff, then I would always do like some different, either like a little church hymn or children's melody, or like a little easy opera thing or something like that, like uh that was like the warm down and sort of like the mental refresher.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Are there any pieces you're really excited about right now that not a lot of people know about?
Hmm. I just got support from the Emory Chamber Music Society to commission a new piece for euphonium and string quartet
Oh,
that
awesome.
we're going to have premiered in next year.
That's sick.
And I've got in good Adam Frey fashion, I've contacted a couple composers about the project, and so I think I have at least 3 confirmations for it. So that's really exciting
That's
to sort of
awesome.
be able to work through that and stuff. So those would be probably the newest new works, and then for the IET 20th anniversary, we're commissioning a lot of new music, especially for tuba euphonium ensemble. So I've got Jose Flores is writing
Oh,
an
nice.
ensemble piece, and Jonathan Kochik, who's a local guy in Atlanta that was at Georgia State. He's working on a piece. Actually, it's funny. He just did an Instagram post that he's got this new piece, and one of my students saw it, and he's like, "Did you know about this?" And I was like, "Of course I knew about it. I didn't know it was that far long, but it's
That's
one of those things."
awesome.
So, and then a couple new solos that are gonna come out and be premiered at IET,
Nice.
and that's just my part. I've also asked a lot of the artists if they've got friends that can write pieces to sort of celebrate to that we'll unveil there. So yeah, I'm really excited about it, and your question reminds me that as soon as we get off this call, I probably need to send a couple follow-up emails to check in on things. So hey, how's this coming along? We're only 4 months away, so like, hey.
Yeah, I'm the worst about that with some of my commissions too, where like I'll kind of go radio silent and then I'll just show up with like 3 months to go and be like, it's done.
Yeah. Hey, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's always a fun time. Cool. Well, uh, Adam, thanks for coming on the show. This is so
Hey,
fun.
absolutely. No, this is great. Really, some great thought-provoking questions and some ideas. I took some notes here on my little
Yeah, I
notepad
did
here as
too.
well, of like, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, I like that. Oh, I got to remember to do this. And I always like that. When you finish something like this, that you're like, I've got some good ideas.
Yeah,
I need to go climb another mountain, I have creative activities to do. So
yeah,
thank you for the
absolutely,
brainstorming, and I hope that this a lot of good information for your listeners, and some good
absolutely.
thought provoking things, and like the bad commercial of things and stuff like that. The main thing about advertising the business things that I do is mainly just to let people know that there's somebody in our community that's within our
Mhm.
community. It's not like Sheet Music Plus, which is a great
Yeah,
service, but I don't think they care too much about euphonium.
yeah,
And like that you can support small, and that
yes.
things do have a vested interest and stuff. And like IET, like
Hmm.
who knew that there's a summer camp where you can literally go and have lessons with these amazing stars,
Yeah.
and sit down and have ice cream with Brian Bowman, which is like
Yeah,
a
and
really
that
awesome
and that's
experience.
that's not like uh, I guess not that I want to disparage the Falcone Festival by any stretch of the imagination, but
Oh
that's
yeah,
not audition barred.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's
No,
so
well, that's a
cool.
total different thing. That's
Yeah,
Falcone Festival is like a
well, yeah,
competition
it's a competition and
with
there's prize
a
money and
festival
stuff.
on the
But
side. Yeah.
yeah, but like I think it's really cool to have something that's a little more open in that way.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. IET is a festival
Yeah.
that, in the truest sense, that it's
Hmm.
high school, college, and adult, and we've even got some retired guys. They call
Yeah.
themselves the geezers. And then we have a solo competition,
Oh,
but the
awesome.
solo competition is just like part of the event. It's a small
Yeah.
part. It's an educational part. And the cool thing there is that you may end up having a lesson with one of the judges,
Oh, that's cool.
which how like most places it's like, oh, you can't talk to them or anything. It's like, yeah, go
Yeah.
get feedback after the first round, and if it turns out that one of the people that you sign up for lessons happens to be judging finals, then that's the way it is. Like, I'm not going to go and police that and stuff. So, but it's an educational performance-based festival where you do lots of playing and lots of interacting. So it's a little bit different. And that's unique. It's not like most of the festivals that we go to where we just sit and listen. It's like, no, you go and you sit and play, I think 4 or 5 hours in a day. And then you're watching master classes and then evening recitals. So anyway, it's a cool, unique event. And the fact that it's gone from first year we started out with 14, and then our biggest year yet, we had, I think, between faculty and staff, 150.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. So
that's
awesome.
Awesome.
So pretty crazy. So cool.
That's pretty sick. Actually, I had another question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think more competitions should have honorable mentions in addition to their first, third place people?
It all depends on the performance level. So I support having an honorable mention that is deserved because everybody played great and the standard was really high. I also support, and I know this is a little controversial, I support sometimes when a competition, when the level is not at where it should be for a prestigious competition, like if the level's not there, then I mean, similar to an orchestra, then maybe there's not a first prize, that there's not somebody who wins this job in this orchestra because they don't feel like anybody was at that level. I know that's a little controversial, but it also is like, hey, we're looking for a quality applicant.
I think it makes sense. And I guess like the way I was going for like the honorable mention side of stuff is like, I mean, maybe there's like, if you have to split hairs about first, third place in the competition, like the level is so high, saying like, hey, we thought you deserve some recognition, or even just
absolutely.
Okay, was the piece you played necessarily like as difficult a repertoire, or like specifically the things we were looking for as these other candidates, maybe not, but like this was so creative and interesting. We wanted to make note of your performance. And one of the things that I think that helps with is like, I mean, a rising tide raises all boats. We're only really helping ourselves by having that kind of a situation, whether it's a call for scores or like a solo competition or something, because like, I mean, if you have honorable mention at 80 things on your resume, like people are going to notice that.
No. And we've added prizes or honorable mentions at the IET competitions. And I think the other thing, there was a very interesting situation that happened where they had an audition. And this happens at professional auditions, is like, like you might not win first place, but they basically are like, hey, the next time we have a job opening, like, you're fast tracked. It's yours. Like, we're going to go ahead and offer you. We don't have a spot for you, but when we do, it's yours because you played so great. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So, well, hey, it's been fabulous. I love all the different ideas and questions, and we'll happy if we come, as you work through, finish up your project and you do some others, be happy to come back on again for another conversation.
Awesome. I'll make sure I send stuff your way too.
Yeah.
Can you let people know what social medias are best to follow you on?
Okay. So obviously euphonium.com is the website, and ietfestival.com. The social media for IET is IET Festival. And then we have the euphonium.com store. And then I'm just Adam Frey, Frey. And I'll do this because it'll make me accountable. I should be having a new adamfrey.com website here probably in the next 3 or 4 months and stuff like that. So
nice.
Awesome, I got to it's probably going to be the end of summer. Let's be realistic. I got a lot going on with planning 20th anniversary and stuff like that.
Yeah, man. You sound like a busy guy. All right. Thanks, Adam.
Busy. All right. Thanks very much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Musical Trick Artista, the podcast. You can find us online at mcgowanmusic.com or listen on your favorite podcast platform. You can also visit us at Andrew McGowan on YouTube or Music McGowan on Instagram.